Magandang umaga po. I'm just a kid from Quezon City. I was born not too far from here, and it's just such an honor and pleasure to be providing these insights today in front of you on the future of enterprise with AI. And it's kind of a daunting task. I must admit, I've spent many late nights just taking and curating all of the information that I've known and experienced over the last 20 years or so. And obviously, we want to land the plane on how to gain a competitive advantage for businesses. Asking very fundamental questions about, is AI a threat, as many of you have these types of concerns? And what does the future of business look like? So lots of different conversations are now starting to percolate around AI, but I had to evaluate this type of paradigm from a deeper perspective and a much more upstream perspective, right? Because it's not just about business. And in hearing the wonderful conversations of entrepreneurs here at the conference, it's just really interesting to see that we are embedding ourselves and transforming business with spiritual values. And that's really the age that we live in right now, but it's more about human dignity and capturing the heart of humanity and developing technology with ethical consideration. And then, of course, asking the big question as these transformative things start to happen to us and for us and by us, how can we be remarkable in the age of superintelligence? So just a little bit about me. I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called Dial In, and we are, as John introduced, a super app. However, we do a lot more than that. We've consolidated numerous business units into a labs division where we have AI innovation and just really pushing the boundaries of things like diffusion models, computer vision, natural language processing, and then building on top of that on behalf of blue chip clients. We have a universal intelligence platform through which it's an entire operating system so that users can have data sovereignty, own their own data, own the connections to that data, and then also own their own content as well. And this is very important in moving forward in the age of AI. And of course, today I'm launching a course as well on AI mastery in the exponential world. And of course, I'll be offering a nice discount to everybody that is attending the conference. We do AI integration and deployment. And with this in mind, I'd like to provide this mental model of what we're about to endeavor today. I'm not going to bring everybody along with me on these crazy ideas, but this is sort of my mental model, this black swan drinking out of a fire hose on this journey that we're about to embark on right now. So let's begin. We're going to start with a few out-of-the-box ideas. I always need to re-encapsulate, re-envision, and recontextualize what people know about business transformation. Just because there's so much progress that's taking place right now, and you have to ask the question, why now? Why are all of these things happening? And so we start to understand why generative AI is possible today. It's because of a ton of user data. A lot of you have kids that are using a ton of social media. They're embedded within their screens. They're embedded within their phones and their computers, and it's becoming more and more of completely ingrained within our daily lives. You have different correlations where you're inferencing that data. You have cloud architecture, you have these things called transformers, and then you have these deep learning models that are being centralized across the Amazons of the world, Microsoft. And then, of course, you have computation, the deep infrastructure that's housing all of these different technologies. But it's really the large data sets that are making all of this available. And something more interesting is happening, though. It's really widening the aperture for how we are involving ourselves with technology, how we're integrating technology into our daily lives. And we are now virtualizing experiences. We're virtualizing and able to capture and model things like biochemistry. And so we're able to advance medicine. We're able to take a look at gene expression in our bodies, and that really unlocks the opportunity for everything that we have here. This is the foundation for absolutely everything that we're talking about in computation. How many of you in this room are familiar with Moore's Law? All right, just a few hands go up. How many of you have seen the 100 version of Moore's Law? Okay, not many hands going up. So Gordon Moore, in the 1960s, the chairman of Intel, he developed this rubric and basically, started to develop how many transistors can you model and squeeze into an integrated circuit. And with this, Ray Kurzweil actually developed something even greater and said, okay, how does computation evolve over time? So what you're looking at here is the best price performance computer of their day. How many little transistors can you actually squeeze into a chip? That includes the mechanical device that took the census in 1890, the relay-based computer that cracked the Nazi Enigma code in World War II, the vacuum tube-based computer that predicted Eisenhower's win, and then into the modern semiconductor as we know it today. So what Gordon Moore observed in this modern semiconductor era is in fact just a refraction of what we're seeing today in this exponential growth of computation. But it also means something more. And in this concept of the singularity, I first got into AI in 2005. It was Ray Kurzweil that actually introduced this concept, which he borrowed from physics, which is what happens when you enter a black hole. Space and time diminish, and the laws of physics themselves break down. And so that's what we're talking about here, is when we actually reach this point of singularity, we are now at the cusp of seeing this future unfold before our very eyes, where our reality looks very much like science fiction. And I'm not just saying this as kind of a hobnob, futurist, geeky science kid, right? This is actually starting to happen before our very eyes. And so what will that look like? How do we become more responsible in humanity? How could we usher in human flourishing? We need to be responsible, we need to be ethical, and we need to put these guidelines in place. One particular example was with Brian Johnson. He is a serial entrepreneur. Some of you may know him as the CEO, co-founder of a company called Braintree. They acquired Venmo and then sold it off to PayPal in, I believe it was 2013 or so. And he had a dark night of the soul after making $800 million or so. He actually had a very dark night of the soul and wondered what he was doing with his life. He was overweight. He had just been going through a divorce. He had left the Mormon church. And he came up with this rubric, don't die, which is very powerful in the age of superintelligence because you can reframe this in a way that says, okay, let's all get behind here. Now, some of you may have a problem with this, with humans trying to achieve immortality and longevity, but he truly believes that he can live forever. Now, having gone to his conference and being a self-proclaimed biohacker and wanting to understand my gene expression, doing cold plunges, data is now changing the rules of the entire game. And he asked this fundamental question: what is AI today if we were to recontextualize it in the same way when we discovered something like cholera, or cholera was living in the water and it was disseminating across individuals? And what happens if you do something very arbitrary, like washing your hands? If a doctor were to wash their hands before delivering a birth, what would happen? Well, you would probably cut mortality rates by about 90%, right? And so these changes in DNA, these changes in the tapestry and the aperture of what it means to be human is now embedded with software. And this put me down a very deep rabbit hole, which is super interesting. And so I have to talk about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. As many of you know, he was a Jesuit priest, but he was also a paleontologist. And what he wanted to do was bring about a convergence and to reconcile science and religion. And he was shunned by the Catholic Church, shunned by the Vatican, because his insights were just very, very provocative with a sense of futurism, right? But he was talking about these big ideas like collective intelligence, mind and matter being unlocked. But it's also about the epochs of humanity that we're now starting to look at from the perspective of these macro scale innovations. And what are we? We are just a blip, a tiny blip in the moment of history. But we're now starting to evolve into superhumans, as he would call it, right? So bringing together what he calls the omega point and the singularity, there are some very, very interesting connotations here, right? So asking you what future generations will say about this AI moment, what is our equivalent of discovering that cholera is being distributed through water, and really tying together his vision. It's evolutionary, it's convergent, it's universalist. And ultimately, how do we put trust properly in the algorithms that now start to run our lives? Well, we're putting trust in stoplights, that they'll manage traffic in different ways. His vision is analogous to Kurzweil's because it's this epoch through which we may not understand what's going on, but if we have good intent and we intend for humanity to flourish with prosperity, then we may be in a better place. He also said that matter is not composed of these basic building blocks, but these complicated webs of relations, and that cosmic life is intrinsically relational, that the universe is undivided into wholeness, and this goes back even before the Bible, right? If we're talking about Hindu scripture and the Vedics, this unified wholeness that brings everybody together as one. So we are part of this creative whole, an unlimited potential whereby ourself and our whole world are constantly drawn into this new existence together. So let's get into some brass tacks. How do businesses transform? But first, I'll mention this cautionary tale. John had talked about how I was part of this unicorn company called Rocket Fuel. It was your very typical Silicon Valley IPO, 2013, a modest $3.4 billion market cap. We were crushing it. We had applied machine learning, and we were one of the first pioneers to truly embed AI into a business model of advertising. Of course, it's very well known that Google does this all the time, but using logistic regression just to be able to tell whether or not somebody would click an ad, whether they want to buy shoes or a pizza. We just knew it and we had it dialed in really, really tight. It was amazing. The parties were awesome. Probably not as good as the one last night, but very, very similar, right? Things were going so well until it wasn't. We all know this. The founders got too arrogant, and they tried to transform an entire industry and said, we're going to automate the entire agency business, right? No humility whatsoever. No humility. And so I learned something else. In 2016, when I was running the Rocket Fuel Innovation Lab as managing director, I had a bunch of data scientists rolling up to me, and I discovered that there was this company that was buying on multiple sides of the election. And it ended up being a company called Cambridge Analytica. $250K per week on both sides of the election using the Facebook API, which means that you have access to all of your friends' information, your friends' friends' information, and all of that was available through the API. And so there's many things that are prevalent today with respect to misinformation and disinformation, and I'm looking forward to speaking with our fellow panelists on what this means and what the implications are. If I could take away something from all of that experience, though, and ushering in what is required of being in the age of superintelligence and preparing yourselves and your children and your children's children of the age of superintelligence, I would attribute it to entrepreneurship, productization, futurism, and technology. In entrepreneurship, you need to have some grit, versatility, and learning there. You have to be interested in solving the world's biggest challenges, and you need to be very, very audacious in doing so, right? What are the moonshot things? Can you think bigger about what problems you want to solve? Productization, being able to understand how products turn into engineering skill sets and how engineering turned into product skill sets. Being reciprocal about that is very, very important. And then, of course, examining all of the ways that the future can unfold and integrating sci-fi, imagination, having a divergent strategy, and being very, very astute when it comes to incorporating lots of different aspects. Now, AI foundations. I talked about the why now, but there's a problem that is occurring with big tech because big tech owns most of the data. Big tech platforms have transformed the entire world and is making things very, very convenient for us. Everything is just one click away on Amazon. However, it's turning into a travesty because of behavior modification. We all know about TikTok, Instagram, the recommendation engines that are very, very convenient for us and that are amazing to use, but how is this data being centralized? It's being centralized within 5, maybe 6 or 7 different companies, and that is becoming the asset of the future. So if I could imbue you with one thing, it's that data is becoming currency, data is becoming labor, and we need to rethink what that means in the future. LLMs are now becoming super interesting. By show of hands, how many people here use ChatGPT? Okay, not bad, not bad. How many of you here, keep your hands up, if you are using ChatGPT every single day? Okay, hands starting to go down. How many of you are using ChatGPT every day and then using it for more technical tasks and things like that? Okay, not too many, not too many. ChatGPT is changing the world, but it is part of a larger family of these iterative algorithms that are now changing computation, changing infrastructure, and the very businesses that we have, right? And so if I were to take this slide and basically take all of the knowledge that I've learned over the last 20 years in AI, there's this family of algorithms, starting with artificial intelligence that's still really difficult to define. But what you're talking about here is just the ability to sense, the ability to think, and the ability to act. But these are computers doing the thinking and the acting, and you have to actually put it in ones and zeros for them to be able to understand. So the vertical line on the left side there, for a computer to be sentient, we still don't know what that means. And then on the lower axis, you have inanimate objects that can't really do much sensing or thinking or acting. And then you have narrow and general intelligence, narrow meaning it could solve a very specific task, something very niche, like a predictive algorithm for how much marketing dollars you should put into a campaign, to more general. I can take this chess algorithm and I can teach it to play Go, and then I can teach it to ride a bike, and then I can teach it the difference between the faces that I see here versus objects that I see here. And then underneath that, you have machine learnings, which is basically instructing computers to do things without explicitly programming them what to do. And that's very important for the entire bolus of what machine learning is. And then we'll get into deep learning now, which is essentially your brain has these things called neurons that light up every time that it recognizes something, right? And whenever you recognize a mic or a speaker or a chair, there's something in your brain that lights up as a combination of these neural networks that are now tied together, right? So take, for instance, this Margot Robbie neuron. You have an input variable and some output variables, and what you're doing is you pass some form of input. Call it like a pixel map from a camera. And so what these neurons are doing, it's lighting up based on which area, based on which specific category it's identifying. It could be a nose, it could be a pair of eyes, it could be a letter, and then it's lighting up based on the weights that are attached to each of these nodes. Again, each node functions after a neuron. It has like a little sigmoid function or a nonlinear transfer function for you algebra junkies, and that's how it's represented in computation systems. And what is it doing? It's searching, classifying, generating new images. It's extracting from big data sets, and it's able to do so at breaknecking pace, right? It's being able to summarize. You can rewrite text. You can now write in Shakespeare. It can generate poems. It could write Eminem lyrics, you name it. We don't have to get super techie here, but how do LLMs work? I provide this in my course, just a full deep dive on how specific representations of words are now functioning in these things called vector space models. You tokenize each and every word, so you have a number representation of each word, and then you're representing that number, so you're putting that in a probability space, and then based on that probability space, like DALL-E is a language model that can make you generate text, you're applying a number to that, and then you're feeding that model with just a ton of data, just seeing what it would generate next, right? So then the output text becomes a vector, and then from there, it is able to generate that text for you on your behalf, and that's why it's able to generalize in a very, very distinct way. There's some challenges in getting businesses to extract a ton of value from generative AI. It's really hard to customize your own LLMs with data. There's great conversations that you can have about these domain-specific ontologies. How can you train a machine learning model to be specific to your type of business? Being able to secure your LLMs, right? Because you don't want to just throw all of your data into that pipeline and give it to OpenAI or Microsoft. No, you have to secure it. Your data needs to be completely encrypted, both at rest and in motion, and you need to localize it. So you need the infrastructure to be able to do this. And you need to deploy LLMs without new infrastructure to generate these high-quality answers. You need full data governance. You need to maintain flexibility. And of course, the time to value is really hard for these, but now we're seeing these iteration cycles happen at a much shorter pace, given what you can do with things like O1 Preview with ChatGPT, right? This is interesting because this solution architecture has existed for the last 10 years. All you're doing with this data is you're ingesting it in a unique data platform that's custom to your business. You're automating these things called data pipelines, meaning you're pulling from a spreadsheet, you're pulling from an Oracle database, you're pulling from a CRM platform, and you're incorporating it with these APIs so that you can make sense of them, right? And this is the challenge because a lot of your data, a lot of you in the room are managing this type of cloud architecture, and it tends to be very fragmented, right? And then you deliver these data experiences at the endpoint. It's the user that's actually interacting with your data, and you need some type of interface, whether that's your phone and you're just scrolling or watching YouTube videos. That is what we call the last mile of that data experience. So what is the strategic roadmap for AI adoption? We start at the very bottom, right? You have to define your generative AI strategy. You have to understand how it fits within your business. You have to define your success criteria. You have to set up an ethical framework from the very beginning in terms of how that data is being managed. You have a governance policy. You have a humane policy to ensure that what you're dealing with is indeed humans and not AIs, right? And I'll get into that in a moment. On the second layer here, then you can start to design and architect your system. And I've done this with a lot of different blue chip companies. No matter what kind of architecture they have, you need to be able to use both centralized methodologies and decentralized methodologies in AI. It's about choosing the right AI model, the right infrastructure. There's a distinction between local models and open source models versus private models that you send over to OpenAI. And then, of course, the operations, the monitoring, the analytics, that all goes hand in hand. And everybody here, you're all business leaders, everybody here is dealing with people, adoption, the scale, the management, and of course, change management is at the core of being able to transform your organization with AI. So landing the plane here with preparing for the AI revolution, you have to act with urgency. This is happening right now, and it continues to accelerate. The technologies continue to accelerate. I've been in the space for almost 20 years now, and I can't keep up with the papers that are coming out. I feel like I'm lagging behind, right? So the sense of urgency needs to be there. Understanding AI foundations, like I've just shared with you, just understanding the difference between an algorithm, a model, understanding the difference between machine learning and deep learning and things like that, basic computer science. Again, it's what I call technical enough to be dangerous. If you could hold a conversation to AI with an ML engineer and understand what your product is actually delivering, it's tying that engineering process with your product in a way that's going to transform your business, that's going to make you very successful. You have to focus and identify, and that's when you're developing a POC, just start with a light test. And again, entrepreneurship is very distinct to this because you have to try a lot of things in order to get the principles right, especially with your business. Upskilling, so we're offering lots of different courses for upskilling in terms of just platform generation, software development, understanding machine learning algorithms like we had mentioned, but building it from a data analytics perspective to understand your business. And then, of course, the ethical and legal considerations and staying informed about all the guidelines that need to be imbued here. Now for something completely different. So those were the foundations for AI in business transformation. And I know that was kind of a whirlwind. I'm going super fast here because I do want to get to some of the remarks with the panel. But I want to talk about a deeper vision. Again, where the exercise here is to broaden the aperture for what it means for AI and human flourishing. And that is what we do at Dial In, is to provide a universal operating system so that data can be safe, data can be ethical, and that AI can be used responsibly. But first, we have to talk about the big problem. Everybody is already aware of what's going on right now with big tech. Like I had mentioned, I planted the seed earlier, but there's this corruption of information networks. If you haven't read Yuval Noah Harari's new book, Nexus, I highly recommend it. He talks about the corruption of our information networks because they're so upstream in that we can't trust the information that we're seeing right now. And the reason for this is because data controls our lives, but we don't control any of it. Like I had mentioned before, it's centralized within these distinct organizations. Our data is actually worth trillions to these companies in aggregate. And what happens? Data comes in the form of keywords, but we don't own it. This has cascading effects, ripple effects in mental health, data AI ethics, and privacy. Think about how many hashtags you've created alone, how many different places that you've clicked through on your web journeys, right? And what's happening in social media, and the reason for all of these things, the decline in mental health, body dysmorphia, eating disorders, polarization, invasive surveillance, behavior modification, device addiction, data extraction, and these privacy violations is leading to anxiety, but also aggregate social unrest. Because we can't trust our information, but even deeper than that, we can't have a conversation with ourselves anymore. We can't have conversations with other nations, let alone opposing parties, because everybody is so hard-grained into their own mentality, and that just really needs to be changed. So people online have lost their sense of dignity, acceptance of reality, and a genuine connection to one another. And this is really the warning that I'm imbuing from the US all over the globe, right? Because we're about to approach an election. I'd like to say that we need to be unified in how we're thinking about things and be aware of the other side always. But there's something interesting going on. There's something else going on with the polarization of these media tools, right? Why is it only binary? Why is it that everything has to be left or right, good or bad, red or blue? Why do we have to imbue every single conversation with something that's so rigid? Why can't we understand some nuance? Why can't we elevate the discussion into something better? And so we've developed this AI framework in our research lab. This is a very arbitrary example just for simplification purposes. But in order to get to this Teilhard de Chardin vision of collective intelligence, you need to start with these foundational elements in data sovereignty, integrity in data, and transparency. How are you utilizing that data? And if you're manipulating it, say you're manipulating it. If you're using an AI, what are you using it for? If it's your data, my data, just be and express how that data is utilized. And it starts with very simple rubrics here, right? If you're generating something, a document or a photo, just be transparent about it. Say you're using an AI, right? And that should be very first and foremost in utilizing these technologies is being very forthright about whether or not you are an AI, because chatbots are going to become very, very prevalent, right? Did you use translation? Did you use this for subtitling? Just be transparent about it from the very beginning. What are you doing with my data? Do I have control? Do I have control over what you're doing with my data? Do I have opt-out policies? GDPR, CCPA, yes, those are Band-Aid fixes for giving people and instrumentalizing some of these things, but how many times have you just accepted cookies, accepted cookies, accepted cookies? It's just so convoluted and fragmented, it needs to be centralized. You need to bring that back from a user perspective. So who is accountable? Who is accountable within your organization? Who is leading the charge for these data ethics frameworks? Do you have a chief privacy officer, for instance? And what about the big tech companies? Should they be responsible? Should they be responsible for you getting canceled on social media or being doxxed or having your profile removed? Who is accountable for all of those things? And what control do you have as a user? I'll get into this abundance pyramid just because this is a nice framework for, again, being able to be instrumental about the Teilhard de Chardin vision on collective intelligence. And we look at this from, Maslow's hierarchy, but we're essentially looking at the triangulation between work, health, and our relationships. The very first is foundations, right? If I can't eat and I don't have water and shelter, that's first and foremost going to be my priority. My relationships and my personal security, that exists on another layer. And then, of course, as we progress on this hierarchy, can I ask for something more? Can I ask for something more than just what I want to do on a day-to-day basis? Like, what are these spiritual connotations, self-actualization? And now we can tie that to the ecosystems that are serving humanity in a more significant way. So when we look at the anatomy of human flourishing, these are the models that we're talking about in the future. This is where I want to land the plane, because these are the specific guidelines to create new businesses that are sustainable, that are driving human flourishing, and these are the types of businesses that are taking into consideration people's data, because your data is your DNA. It's more than just a commodity. It is an extension of yourself, right? So being able to illustrate and codify complex emotions or attributes for every single user. What am I doing? How am I doing it? What are my likes? What are my preferences? You have to be able to train AI models with my preferences. You need to be able to enact meaningful interactions between different entities. So how is this data relating and acting with one another? How do you map these complex personas, these archetypes and attributes? Delivering unprecedented granularity across these digital experiences, and then finding deeper linkages between each and every object. So there are countless relational models that exist here, but how can you encapsulate these data objects in a way where I could understand you much better, right? And it starts with an arbitrary example. You're all sitting at a table, maybe you're having some Thai food, and I like my food really, really spicy. But my mom, who's sitting over there, may not like as much spicy food. So spicy to me may not be spicy to her. This duck curry, we both love duck. This duck is at a 3 of spice. So to her, maybe it's a 7. So you need to be able to build a relational model that's putting those things together in a way that you can understand. But that is the fundamental building block of understanding the self as it associates with society. And so at Dial In, this is exactly what we're building. We're starting with an iOS app, but in order to capture your entire world, to build what's called a semantic layer for understanding meaning and understanding the world around you in a new and complex way, this is what you can now start to capture with AI. And that's what we've done with Dial In. You can capture your restaurants, you can decide what kind of music you like, you can decide that you either like a wine list or the hostess or the carpet at a restaurant, right? These are no longer arbitrary examples. You can dial into your specific needs and your preferences, and that is what you need to train your AI agent on. And that's what the software for a new society needs to imbue, right? What are these relational points that are going to drive economic prosperity? And what can we do to enable harmonization of self and society to provide these hyper-efficiencies, to deliver human prosperity? In the self, now we're tying this back to the pyramid and our hierarchy of needs. How can I be more fulfilled when I can dial in on what I love the most? How can I be Nicos at a 10 out of 10 every single day, not just through my cold plunges and what I put in my body and my health? What are my preferences? What are my consent attributes? Do I have control over those things? And how do these things percolate into a society? How do those things percolate into every organization that is being fueled with our data? Now we're talking about data as labor, data as work. We're looking at aligning consensus mechanisms so that I can provide you and provision you with my data in a way that I have control over it. Social impact. We're all here talking about social impact and the cultural connotation of bayanihan. And then, of course, the higher values that we have here. And it really melts my heart to know that an organization like UniaPac exists to have God-centered values to transform business into the future. And now we can start to solve the world's biggest challenges around biodiversity, terraforming the earth, whether we want to do that in Mars, but we need to do it right here, right? I created an economic model out of our research lab in basically understanding what the private model and the public model of data looks like. If we're looking at just the advertising industry, that's a $3.4 trillion total addressable market. We're looking at about 100 million petabytes of data that's created per week. The estimated value right now per user, if you're just looking at putting your email address on a CRM, $263. That's a measly $263. The proposed model unlocks this completely when everybody is dialed in. You have your data that's feeding a public market, but then also yourself. You can house all of your data, and that value incrementally increases over time to create this abundant framework. In the public market, if I were to put all of my data up, that's up to $10 million in data utility. The AI insights that can garner all of these parameters, it's only utilizing about 18% of that. But if you were to leverage all of these AI attributes, now you're looking at about 10,000 AI attributes per user, 10 billion that are unknown. You have a 1,300 increase in efficiency gains and up to 400% in just ad spend efficiency. Understanding my preference is a whole lot more, but the key value here, the key metric here is the enterprise value would also increase if you give users autonomy over your data. And it could be anywhere from 100K to 200K per year in this new commercial model for data. And that's essentially going to harmonize ourself, our society with these hyper efficiencies for human prosperity. So I'll end with this before we get to our panel discussion. The omega point that Teilhard de Chardin was speaking of is something more significant than the singularity. Singularitarians, if you look at the Singularity University School, they're very science-based and everything is about matter. But what I love about Teilhard de Chardin's work is that he incorporated mind and matter into a form of software and hardware. But that's exactly what I've been describing right now, is with really good software, we need to upgrade our software such that we can upgrade our hardware as well. And you've seen many examples at this conference of the spirit of renewal, right? God makes things new. But what often happens is we need to go to the depths and we need to experience a lot of suffering, apparently, but we benefit in the end from it, right? So in this transcendence, in this journey, is it going to look like something right out of a sci-fi movie? Are we going to converge with technology? Maybe. Teilhard de Chardin says maybe we will converge in a way that's going to be more meaningful for all of us. But at the same time, we need to reorient how we're looking at technology because we are already tethered to our technology. How many of you here would be willing to, go without your cell phone for 2 months, 3 months? Yeah, you could do it. It would probably be very beneficial for you, but you are locked into that thing and your data is all over it. But what I'm saying here, and what Teilhard de Chardin is saying, is that this is no different than a caveman that was just trying to pick a piece of fruit with a stick. These are the tools that we have at our disposal, and we've had it since the beginning of time. And it's no different. It is a refraction of what we're seeing in Moore's Law, what we're seeing in exponential change, but that is exactly where we are as a species, which is why we have to broaden the aperture and look at where we are. And this is much deeper. This is a cosmologic cycle, right? And as we continue to be constantly burdened with the addiction in our phones, we just have to be cognizant of utilization and the ethics that are around it, right? But maybe a world could be something more like this. This is my friend, Su-Gwen Chung, who works out of our lab sometimes, and we've spoken on many panels together, and what she does is she codes her own robots, and she is painting with robots. And so this is a form of biomimicry in which she's collaborating with that robot in a way in which she is unlocking her creativity. This isn't a prompt that she's just like updating on ChatGPT. This is something incredibly meaningful, and it's making her life meaningful because that AI becomes her partner, her collaborator. And that's exactly the world that we're talking about here with generative AI. We can now start to broaden the aperture to look at changing hardware because there's this reciprocal motion that's taking place between understanding in a virtual environment and putting things into software in a way that you can model them, and you could now start to create new forms and expressing genes in such a way that we're going to unlock longevity and meaning in our lives in so much more significant ways. And again, I speak with such passion here because I really feel like we're at an all hands on deck type of moment here where we need to just get together and just unify ourselves because it's gonna get crazy, it's gonna get out of control. So if we want something like this, if we want this vision for our children in which our children are going to collaborate with robots in more meaningful ways and they're going to be their best friends, we need to broaden the aperture in a way to look at what we have as a species, as a unified species, so that we can flourish in humanity. And AI reveals something much deeper about new models in the future, right? It reveals our place in the universe. Thinking these business models to re-envision our relationship with technology, and just consider the fact maybe we are already cyborgs. Not that I want to upload my cognition into my mobile phone or anything, but at some level, it's kind of already there. And again, our success will be determined by our capacity to converge and unify, and we're already part of this creative whole of unlimited potential here, whereby ourselves and our world are constantly drawn into existence together. And I have to end with this. Christ is the omega point itself. In his third nature is the prime mover of the evolving universe. So there is a design intelligence there that Teilhard de Chardin was speaking of. He's not saying that this is the singularity point. He's saying that this very nature is embedded in everything that we do. And with Jesus emerges a new structure of existence, a new type of consciousness. And so what does this mean for all of us? I'm not advocating for the singularity, that this is indeed the second coming, but as Teilhard de Chardin expressed, this is already embedded in everything that we do. God already exists in everything that we do. And I'll end with his quote. He said, "We are not human beings experiencing the world with spirituality. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." And I'll end it with that. Thank you very much.